Welcome to Whisper and Learn channel. In today's video, we'll dive into another engaging story to help you improve your English listening skills while enjoying a relaxing and stress-free experience. Each story is crafted to teach practical vocabulary, enhance your comprehension, and provide meaningful life lessons. So grab your headphones, relax, and let's begin.
It was a cold and gray morning in the heart of the city. Cars honked impatiently as people hurried along the crowded sidewalks. Among them was David, a 35-year-old office worker. David was always busy. His mornings started early and his nights ended late. He worked long hours at a marketing firm, constantly chasing deadlines and answering emails. David had little time for anything else. He skipped breakfast, rarely called his family, and barely noticed the world around him. His days were a blur of meetings, reports, and coffee runs. Coffee was his fuel. Every morning, he stopped at the same coffee shop on his way to work. He ordered a large black coffee, paid without making eye contact, and left in a rush. This particular Monday morning, David was more stressed than usual. The skies were overcast, and the city seemed gloomier than ever. He clutched his bag tightly as he walked briskly down the busy street. A big presentation loomed at 10 a.m., one his boss had emphasized was crucial for landing a new client. The pressure weighed heavily on him, making his usual hurried pace feel even more frantic. When he reached the coffee shop, the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted him, momentarily soothing his frazzled nerves. The shop was bustling, filled with the chatter of morning customers and the clinking of mugs. Normally, David didn't pay attention to the details of the shop, but today the noise felt overwhelming. He scanned the room and saw a long line snaking toward the counter. David sighed audibly, his shoulders slumping. His watch read 8:15 a.m. "Great," he muttered under his breath. "This is just what I need." He joined the line, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as he waited. The line moved painfully slowly. A man at the front was chatting with the barista, laughing as if he had all the time in the world. David tapped his foot impatiently. He checked his watch. It's 8:20. "Come on," he thought, glancing toward the front. Behind him, a group of friends chatted happily about their weekend plans. Their laughter only irritated him further. How can people be so relaxed? David wondered, frustration bubbling inside him. Every second felt like an eternity as he rehearsed his presentation in his head, silently willing the line to move faster. Finally, after what felt like ages, it was David's turn. He stepped up to the counter, his tone curt as he said, "Large black coffee." He barely looked up at the cashier, pulling out his wallet and readying himself to pay. Before he could hand over his money, the cashier smiled brightly and said, "It's already paid for." David blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone edged with confusion. The cashier pointed to a small sign propped up on the counter. It read, "Today's special. The person in front of you has paid for your coffee. Enjoy your free cup." David frowned, glancing over his shoulder instinctively. He scanned the room, trying to spot the generous stranger. But no one stood out. The other customers seemed engrossed in their own lives, typing on laptops, chatting with friends, or staring at their phones. Okay, thanks," David said awkwardly, his voice uncertain. He picked up his coffee, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude? Confusion? Guilt? He couldn't quite place it. As he left the counter and stepped outside, the cold air hit his face, making him clutch the warm cup tighter. The rich aroma of the coffee drifted upward, but David barely noticed it. His thoughts were consumed by the strange gesture. Why would someone pay for my coffee? He wondered. Who would even do that? He couldn't remember the last time he had done something similar for anyone. The generosity felt almost uncomfortable, like a spotlight had been placed on his own habits. David's routine was about efficiency, getting from one task to the next. He rarely slowed down to think about others, let alone do something kind for a stranger. Yet here he was, holding a cup of coffee, bought by someone he would likely never meet. As he walked toward his office, the questions kept swirling in his mind. Was it just a random act of kindness? Did they know me? Should I have said more to the cashier? He felt a pang of regret for not expressing his gratitude more sincerely. The gesture was so small, yet it left a surprising impact. By the time he reached his office building, David found himself smiling faintly. The free cup of coffee hadn't solved his stress or eliminated his looming deadlines, but it had done something else. It had made him pause, even if just for a moment, to think about the unexpected kindness in an otherwise rushed day. When he arrived at the office, David tried to push the coffee incident out of his mind. But as he sat at his desk, preparing for the presentation, his thoughts kept drifting back to it. He couldn't shake the feeling that the gesture, though small, meant something important. David sighed and turned his attention back to his presentation. Finally, it went well. David's boss was impressed, and his colleagues congratulated him. David smiled and thanked them, but the sense of achievement felt hollow. Instead of pride or relief, he felt empty. As he sat back at his desk, his thoughts returned to the coffee shop. He realized with a pang of guilt that he hadn't even thanked the cashier properly for the free coffee. He had taken the cup, mumbled an awkward thanks, and left without a second thought. Now it felt like a missed opportunity. By evening, David felt drained. As he packed up his things and prepared to leave the office, he couldn't help but wonder, why had that one small gesture affected me so much? The next morning, David returned to the coffee shop. He tucked his scarf tightly around his neck as the chill of the early city air nipped at his face. The streets were already bustling, but this time, David didn't feel the usual rush. He pushed open the familiar glass door, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around him like a comforting blanket. The shop was just as busy as the day before. The line stretched nearly to the door, but David didn't sigh or check his watch. Instead, he waited patiently, taking in his surroundings. The barista at the counter worked quickly, her cheerful smile never fading. She handed drinks to customers with an energy that seemed almost contagious. As he shuffled forward in the line, David noticed a young man near a corner table. The man was carefully helping his elderly grandmother carry a tray laden with 2 steaming cups and a muffin split in half. The grandmother gave him a grateful smile, and David couldn't help but feel a small tug at his heart. He realized how easily he would have overlooked such a moment before. Nearby, a small child sat with her father at another table. She giggled excitedly as her father held out his cup of hot chocolate for her to sip. Her laughter bubbled through the room, lightening the atmosphere. David smiled to himself, surprised by how much he enjoyed simply observing the people around him. The line moved slowly, but for once, David didn't mind. He noticed the little things, the way the sunlight filtered through the window, making the steam from the cups shimmer. The faint chatter of conversations blending with the hum of the coffee machines, and the way the warmth of the shop made the cold outside feel like a distant memory. Finally, it was David's turn. He stepped up to the counter, greeted by the same barista who had served him the day before. "Large black coffee," he said, his voice calmer than usual. As the cashier prepared his coffee, David took a deep breath. "Yesterday," he began, "someone paid for my coffee. I just wanted to say thank you." The cashier paused and looked up, her eyes lighting up with a warm smile. "That's how it works," she said. "It's a pay-it-forward system. Someone does something kind for you, and you pass it on to someone else." David nodded, her words sinking in. Pay it forward, he thought. The idea was so simple, yet so powerful. He glanced around and made a decision. "Can I pay for the next person's coffee?" he asked. The cashier's smile widened. "Of course, that's the spirit." David handed over his payment, feeling an unexpected surge of excitement. He stepped to the side, cradling his own coffee in his hands, and waited. The line moved forward, and a young woman approached the counter. Her face looked tired, her shoulders slumped under the weight of what seemed to be a difficult morning. The cashier rang up her order, then paused. "Actually," she said, "your coffee has already been paid for." The young woman blinked, startled. "Really? By who?" The cashier gestured toward David. The woman turned to him, her tired expression giving way to a look of pure gratitude. "Thank you so much," she said softly, You just made my day." David felt a warmth spread through his chest. "You're welcome," he replied, smiling. He meant it. The woman picked up her coffee and left, her steps lighter than when she had entered. David stood by the counter for a moment longer, watching her leave. He was struck by how much joy he felt in that simple exchange. It wasn't about the cost of the coffee. It was about the connection, the way one small act could ripple outward and brighten someone else's day. For the first time in a long time, David didn't feel like he was rushing through life. He felt present, grounded, and, most surprising of all, grateful. Over the next few weeks, he found himself seeing the world a little differently. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside him, allowing him to notice things he'd previously ignored and observe things around his life with a zoom-in lens. Little moments of humanity stood out to him now, and he began to realize how easy it was to bring kindness into his own life. One morning, as David entered the lobby of his office building, he saw a woman struggling to carry 2 heavy boxes. Normally, he would have walked past, too focused on his own thoughts. But this time, he stopped. "Let me help you with that," he said, taking one of the boxes. The woman smiled gratefully. "Thank you so much," she said. "I really appreciate it." David felt a small sense of pride as he carried the box to the elevator for her. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it made a difference. That moment stuck with him throughout the day. He began to notice other opportunities to be kind. He held the door open for strangers at coffee shops and on his way into the office. He complimented his coworkers, something he had never thought to do before. David also made a conscious effort to reconnect with his family. One evening, he picked up his phone and called his mom. It had been weeks since their last conversation. "Hi, Mom," he said, feeling a little guilty. "How are you?" His mom sounded delighted to hear from him. They talked for nearly an hour, catching up on everything from her garden to her new book club. When he hung up, David realized how much he had missed those conversations and how easily he had let them slip away in the busyness of his life. Even his daily routine began to change. During his lunch breaks, David started taking short walks around the block. Instead of rushing back to his desk, he breathed in the fresh air and let his mind wander. He noticed the street vendors he used to ignore: an elderly man selling flowers, a young woman grilling hot dogs. One Friday evening, David stayed late at the office to finish a report. The building was quiet, and the hum of the air conditioning filled the empty halls. As he packed up his laptop, he heard the faint sound of footsteps. Turning, he saw the janitor pushing a cart down the hallway, a mop and a stack of cleaning supplies neatly arranged on top. David had seen the janitor many times before, but had never thought to speak to him. This time, he paused. "Hi," David said, stepping out of his office. "I'm David. Thank you for keeping the office so clean." The janitor stopped and looked up, surprised. He smiled shyly and said, "Oh, thank you. I'm Joe." David extended his hand, and they shook. "How long have you been working here, Joe?" he asked. 20 years, Joe said with a small chuckle. "I've seen a lot of people come and go." They chatted for a few minutes. David learned that Joe had a wife and 2 kids, and that he loved to cook on weekends. "My kids love my spaghetti," Joe said with a grin. David laughed. "That sounds amazing. You'll have to share your recipe sometime." As David walked to his car that night, the conversation replayed in his mind. He realized how many people he had overlooked in his busy life. People like Joe, who quietly went about their work without seeking recognition. David thought about how much he had missed while he was so caught up in his own world. Everyone has a story, he thought, and sometimes all it takes is a moment to notice them. Months passed, and David's life began to change in ways he hadn't expected. He had begun to notice the things that truly mattered. David also started making time for his friends. Most weekends he used to bury himself in work, but now he joined his friends for hikes, movie nights, and Sunday brunches. These moments, filled with laughter and connection, gave him something to look forward to. He even began volunteering at a local shelter once a month, helping to serve meals to those in need. It wasn't something he had ever considered before, but the gratitude on the faces of the people he served filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. One morning, David walked into the coffee shop as usual. The line was shorter, and there was a calm hum in the air. When it was his turn, David stepped up to the counter and ordered his usual large black coffee. He reached into his wallet, pulling out his card, but before he could hand it over, the cashier stopped him. "Your coffee is paid for," she said with a warm smile. David blinked in surprise. "Again?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. The cashier nodded. "It happens more often than you'd think," she replied, her tone cheerful and knowing. "Pay it forward days are becoming a thing here." David laughed softly. "Well, I guess I'll pay for the next one." Walking down the sidewalk, David realized that kindness wasn't about grand or dramatic acts. It was often found in the little things, a smile, a thank you, or a free cup of coffee. These moments, though fleeting, could ripple outward, creating connections that made the world feel just a bit brighter. For the first time, David felt something he hadn't in years: contentment. It wasn't the kind of fleeting happiness that came from a job promotion or a compliment. It was deeper, more enduring. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing he could make a difference, no matter how small. It reminded him to slow down, appreciate the small moments, and look for ways to bring joy to others. In a busy, chaotic world, simple acts of generosity can create ripples of positivity that touch countless lives.
Thank you for listening to this story on Whisper and Learn channel. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something valuable today. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that make learning English fun and effective. Let us know in the comments what you think of this story or what topics you'd like to hear next. See you in the next video. Happy learning!